In this episode of Funghi and Friends, Funghi, Bernardo, and Dees are joined by legendary adventure photographer Jay Toups, aka JubbishJay. We dive deep into Jay's love of mountaineering and adventure, how he got started with commercial photography, the importance of storytelling, his entire creative process, the difference between commercial photography and NFT photography, and so much more. As always, this podcast is for entertainment purposes only and should not be relied upon for investment decisions. Funghi, Dees, Bernardo, and guests may own NFTs discussed in this pod. Alright, GM everybody.
GM.
Today,
GM.
we are here with our second episode of Funghi and Friends. We're joined with the one and only Funghi, Bernardo, and our special guest today, Jay. Jay is one of the adventure photographers I started collecting from the very beginning of my collecting journey, and one of the most, unique and badass adventure photographers in the space. So we're going to dive deep on all things adventure photography, Jay's background, inspirations, and whatever the hell else we come up with over the next 90 minutes or so. So yeah, without further ado, Jay, thanks for being here.
Absolutely.
How the hell did you get into photography?
All right. Man, how did I get into photography? I think I was going to school and I was living in a big city, and I was really overwhelmed by the people there and how many people there were, and just this idea that like I was passing, I would go get coffee and you pass like probably 10,000 people just on your way to get coffee, and like you don't make eye contact with any of them, you don't look at any of them, but they all have names and stories and families and everything else. And I just wanted to be able to know some of the like small little, priceless interactions that were happening around me all the time without just being kind of like in my own little bubble. And photography became the medium that I chose to sort of do that through. So I got an old film camera at a flea market, and I started shooting pictures of like, I got a really long lens, and I just started taking pictures of like little tiny interactions between people in this gigantic city. Yeah, it was fun. And then that kind of turned into this obsession with like sharing those moments that are important to me. I got really into hiking, really into the outdoors, and then eventually into like mountaineering. And the whole idea of mountaineering is to see things that people haven't ever seen, is to climb mountains that don't have names, and there aren't trails, and there aren't, landmarks, and you just kind of find your way. But once you reach that place, it's just overwhelming. It's this overwhelming, like humbling feeling of this like sort of beautiful insignificance that you find once you're up there. And I started trying to share those stories whenever I got home, and I just couldn't. I didn't have any way to actually talk to like my friends or my family about what I experienced when I was up there. It's hard to translate. You can't really tell somebody about, how it felt to be in a place. So again, I turned to photography to help tell the stories of these mountains and the, adventure it takes to get there. So it's a tool for me to share the emotions that I feel, and I hope that other people kind of connect with them.
So early on, what got you on that first mountaineering trip, or like what led you toward mountaineering?
I took a trip with a few of my friends and my older brother to Norway, and we it was just kind of like a post graduation, spend all of our pennies on like the worst rental car imaginable. It was called the Paddle Wagon. It was like this. We affectionately named it that. It was from this company that like buys crashed cars and then just rents them out for super cheap. So we're driving around, it has like holes in the side of it and stuff. And we just drove it and hiked, in like vans and skinny jeans as high as we could on these peaks. And, it was just like, we did everything wrong really, but like the power of those places was still very present. And, I just got hooked on it. I got hooked on the feeling of like reaching the summit, hitting the peaks. And then I got even more hooked on the journey to get there, the like A to B, and I found that most of the most powerful things that happen on those expeditions happen not at the summit, they happen on the way. And I like longed for a way to share that, and photography was that.
And before Norway, were you born and raised in Florida?
I was, yeah.
So there wasn't really many like mountains.
No, zero. I had a hill next to my house that I thought was really sick when I was about 6 years old, and that was it.
And then you're like, boom, Norway.
Yeah.
How old were you on that Norway trip?
Like 19, I think. Yeah, I think I was 19. I think that was like the official start of my journey to be like a full-time photographer. Was that I just found that like I didn't have any other way to get out what was in my heart. You know what I mean? A lot of my art stems from like what's going on in my head, and so I don't really want to show like how a place looks. I want to show how it made me feel. I feel like there's a big difference between the two when you're taking pictures, especially of the outdoors, because like there's just so much. Like everything outside is so pretty. It becomes kind of easy. You know what I mean? You just like you park at an overlook or hike to drive to a national park, or you hike a trail and you take a picture, and it's all really pretty because it's just really pretty, and it does half the work for you. So I went really hard into trying to find places that people haven't seen before, and mountains that they haven't named or built trails on. And I think that's what like it was always this seeking of things that hadn't been seen or hadn't been done, because those were the things that impacted me the most, and I hoped would impact other people the most as well. Yeah.
I'm curious, what was the first trip that you took specifically for photography, like after the Norway trip?
I think so. I my wife and I built a house out of a fire truck. We didn't really have the money to do like any more big travels like that. I spent it all on going to Norway one time and driving around in the paddle wagon. So we just we honestly saved up for like 2 years or so of me like doing commercial work and like whatever photography jobs I could get. And we had this dream of sort of living on the road and trying to live a life that was conducive to this like seeking of adventure, this seeking of beauty that was out there in the world. So we converted a fire truck into a house, and we left and we drove straight to Alaska. That was like our first thing. Alaska being like the most rugged and wild place that we could imagine, and also physically the farthest away from Florida that we could possibly get. So we headed straight for Alaska, and I think we went broke like halfway there. Eventually got some more jobs from photography stuff and ended up making it. And we spent quite a while in Alaska. So it was a lot of like, I wouldn't say it was specific trips. It wasn't like we flew to a destination and went hike or travel. It was more just we kind of converted our entire life to chasing that dream, because like either we couldn't afford or didn't have the time to actually travel like airfare full time around the world or anything like that, but the dream was very much alive, and we made that happen with an old fire truck. So thanks.
What's it like living in such a small space with your partner full time?
It's the best thing in the world. We just like I feel like there's she's everything, man. She's the best thing about me. I wouldn't want to know me without her. She's like, yeah, she's the person who pushes me to the top of those mountains and makes me make the best art I can after I get to the top. She's like pretty much the reason for all of it, and the privilege I feel to be able to take her to those places and climb up those mountains with her. As we're also kind of experiencing life together, we're climbing, emotional mountains, relationship mountains, and physical mountains. We're sort of like all of life that we have is spent together, and I like couldn't imagine it any other way at this point.
How did you meet your wife?
Pretty standard. I was playing ultimate frisbee and I actually met her older sister and became we just became good friends. And one day she told me that her little sister's car broke down, and she asked me if I could fix it. I used to work on cars a lot, and I went fix it, and I don't think ever stopped hanging out after I fixed her car. It was just yeah, we just hung out forever after that.
You guys are the best together, like,
Thanks.
for the people who don't know.
Yeah, it's fun. A lot of people ask, like, they're like, oh man, like couldn't imagine being in a space that small with, like, you know, whoever I'm dating, whoever I'm with. I'm like, man, then maybe you're like with the wrong person. I feel like we have about 10 feet, and I sometimes wish it was less. Like, we just like being together, you know?
Yeah, I love Mrs. D's. I'm somebody who probably needs just a little bit. She needs the room away from me too. I'm a little loud, little in all ways, and yeah. But
yeah, you had mentioned like a little bit about the limitations of going on an adventure, getting to this destination, and then wanting to share this experience with your friends and family. And you know, a lot of like your adventures, it sounds like, end up on summits or like at a final destination, and you know, you take a shot and then you share that. And do you find that as you publish your work, considering that a lot of the art is in the adventure in itself, that there's limitations when that shot finally hits, you know, wherever you publish it at, and that, you know, what do you do to tackle those limitations to make sure that the viewer can enjoy and experience like the shot to its fullest?
That is a really good question. I feel like I have a few different answers to that, if that's okay. So, like, one thing that I do a lot is I try to take more of, I think I said this earlier, but I really try to show how I feel about a place more than just how it looks. And so I kind of see the world as this, it's a very like dark place, just with a lot of struggles with mental health and other things. And I feel like all the best things that have ever happened to me, it's like poking holes in that dark cloud that's kind of all over the place, and those like beams of light kind of come through. And I kind of alternate between either that feeling or this feeling of like complete isolation. And so I try to capture one of those two feelings in most of my work, either like this glimmer of light amidst all the, you know, all the darkness, or just like a feeling of feeling alone in your head. And I think a lot more people connect with that than maybe just like a mountain or a lake or like a river or something like that. So it really is like, I feel like nature by itself is extremely expressive. And so being in the place, you feel that. You can be very in touch with what's going on in your head when you're standing in these like wild places that maybe people haven't seen, and there's like nature, and there's animals, and there's like a bit of danger to it, and there's just like, there's so many things going on that you're able to sort of like hyper focus on how you feel in that very moment. And you start to not really even pay attention as much to exactly where you are in terms of like mountain peaks and lakes and valleys and stuff. You're more focused on how you feel. And I think people can relate to that, especially if they haven't been to those places. So a lot of my work is around like accessibility. I feel like it's a huge honor and a huge like humbling privilege to even be able to like physically access those places. Sometimes financially access those places, depending on the place. And people deserve to see it. People deserve to feel that way. I feel like the outdoors and nature has like healed me in a lot of ways, and people need that. You know, people need to see it, and if I can get to it and share it with them, that's you know, the most humbling thing I can do.
Yeah, I mean, that's super powerful, and I feel like a lot of the shots that you've taken are like very powerful images. And you know, I'm wondering, a lot of this is like preparation. You had mentioned, like we were chatting earlier, that sometimes you go on an excursion and there's like a short window of time that you need to capture something. Mm-hmm. Have you ever gotten to, say, a summit or a final destination, and like the conditions were different in a way that you weren't expecting, but that made for like a better final outcome?
I would say most of my favorite shots, actually.
That's amazing. We
plan as much as we can for weather and hail and storms and like whatever else is happening, but mountains are very unpredictable, so we don't catch it all the time. And I feel like that's where most of my best shots come from, is when everything did not go according to plan. Even if we hit this, maybe we don't, but I think when nature really shows its power to you, it just heightens all of your senses. And I feel like I have an even greater drive to shoot whenever the conditions turn super like poor. It's almost like is like a fight or flight response, but like
Yeah.
an art, you know what I mean? Like you just try to kind of accept what nature gives you, and then figure out a way to shoot it, even if it's, you know, horrible weather or horrible conditions.
I'm really curious. So you grew up in Florida, but you keep taking yourself to these incredible terrains like mountains, glaciers, forests, jungle. Out of all these environments, is there one that feels the most like home to you, or the most where you're kind of comfortable and I'd be curious because you've kind of seen it all, seems like.
I like the cold a lot. I've always enjoyed like glaciers and snow-capped mountains and like really, really cold places. I like when there's like icicles hanging off my eyelashes and stuff. That's probably my favorite environment to be in. I feel like it adds a level to like the difficulty of reaching a place, and there's something about the effort that it requires to get somewhere where like it kind of forces you to focus on the journey. You know what I mean? If you're just following a trail that leads to a summit and it's like peachy weather in the spring and there's flowers and stuff next to you, that's an experience by itself, and that's nice. But sometimes when you really struggle and you have to really push and like dig deep to reach a place, there's just a different feeling on the journey there as well as the top. I find that I focus more on the journey to get somewhere when the conditions are worse and the environment is harsher. So I think I just really like the cold for that reason. With that being said, I don't think being too comfortable is a good thing, and I am pretty comfortable shooting in the cold. So like I'm trying to challenge myself more with places that I'm just really unfamiliar with or out of my element with. I think my last project I did in Mexico in the Yucatan, which was like, I've never been there. I've never been to a jungle. There's like monkeys swinging in the trees. I'm like hot. We're all sweaty and sticky, and there's bugs everywhere. It's like the complete opposite of what I usually do. And it was very, very challenging for me. You know, all the colors are different. The palettes are different. I usually work with like whites and blues and, you know, oranges. And now it's like greens and browns and yellows. And it really, I enjoyed it a lot. So I'm actually looking forward to doing more work that's kind of like outside of my comfort zone. And I feel like sometimes you either make the worst or the best art of your career when you're like pushed in that way. So
That's super cool. Yeah, I remember like we met IRL a few months ago, and one of the places you had been to, you were going on like an expedition. And when you came back, I was like, how did it go? You're like, oh, it was so good. You told me about the trip. Then you're like, I was like, oh, how were the shots? And you're like, oh, I didn't take any.
yeah, horrible.
I didn't take
Shots
any.
sucked.
Yeah, and to me that like really stood out. Like
Yeah.
you are not after just an end polished piece that looks good. Like you've kind of like, you know, imbued your life with art. Like it's that way of living that is artistry where you do focus. And I know for you, it's not just like a familiar saying like, oh, the journey, it's the journey, not the destination. Like it really is for you.
Yeah.
Because you were in like amazing spirits. And you're like, I had such a good time, but yeah, I didn't take any photos that I can ever use.
You know, I think part of that comes down to like your willingness to admit that you just didn't create something that you're in love with. And I plan to do this for the rest of my life, however long that may be. And so like putting out work that may be mechanically good, but the emotion isn't there. That's the main thing I'm looking for is that power. So it can be a pretty place. It can be a beautiful place, but I've seen enough pretty places. Like if you want to see a pretty place, go on Google and like type in the name of a place and see like 9,000 images of a pretty place. You know what I mean? And I feel like I need something more out of an image. I feel like cameras are accessible. I feel like photography is like one of the most accessible art forms to get started. We all have super nice cameras on our phones. Like it's kind of everywhere. And so it needs to be something really special for me to connect with it at this point, especially when like this isn't a short-term thing for me. I think I've been doing it full time for the last 10 years, you know, and hope to do it for at least another, 10, 20, however long I can. And so like if I release images of every pretty place I've been to, it would be like far too many and feel far too easy. It would feel less like art and more like I was like a recorder, you know? I just kind of put myself in a pretty place and then just show you how it was, you know?
How did you break into like the initial first commercial photography gig? Because that's like kind of like a 0 to 1 moment for most artists.
Yeah, it absolutely is. You're completely right. So I tried for about 2 years actually to get my first big commercial job, and I was like sending emails and I would attend events, and there would be like, you know, conventions where there were representatives from like Nat Geo or North Face or Patagonia or whoever I was like really bidding to try and work for, in between just working for like local flip-flop companies or like whatever I was doing. You know what I mean? This is again when I was like 20 or 21 or something like that. And so I finally figured like, you know, I can take good pictures of a place, but if it's something that somebody else has done, like even if I do it better, it's been done. You know, so I got and I took that same mentality that I have for like releasing and producing art, and I kind of adapted it to getting jobs and reaching out to companies. So I figured if a company gets 10,000 emails a day from artists trying to get work, and they get, you know, 500 phone calls a day from people trying to get work, like what can I do to stand out that is more than just art? You know what I mean? Maybe I do something different, maybe I do something better. But what I did was I actually printed a book. I printed like a little physical book with all of my art in it, and I drew a little stick figure of me like in these places that I had took, and I made it like I was wearing like a jacket or pants or like whatever from these companies in my little stick figure drawings on top of images I had taken. And I made this physical book and I shipped it to him. I just like dug around till I found the shipping address basically for the front desk of like a major outdoor company. And I figured, you know, 1,000 emails, 500 phone calls, and one physical book with stick figure drawings. Like somebody's gonna remember it. You know what I mean? Like I feel like they aren't gonna get it and just throw it away. And that's exactly what happened. Like I wanted to do something that was different than everybody else, even if it wasn't the best or I hadn't been doing it for the longest. I wanted it to be new, and I was definitely the only person who drew stick figures in a book, so they hit me back. That was like my first real commercial.
Damn.
job.
So like for like 2 years kind of assessed it, and then the book was the breakthrough.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a message in there for people to do stuff differently. It's like another cold message, email, DM, phone call, whatever.
Yeah.
It's like sometimes it works, but if you go that extra mile, like people aren't going to throw away something that you took the time to put together with love and care. And I think that's kind of like a theme throughout a lot of your work. It's definitely something I noticed early on. It was kind of what drew me to your work in the sense where I felt this deeper story and connection. I think one of the things you do really well is you put out like behind the scenes and explanation. Like you put out really good media content around your photography. Like you put out long form videos talking about why the pieces are meaningful. You put out behind the scenes videos to show, like you're saying, the terrains and the journey. And I think you do a really good job kind of telling the whole story behind your work. Like Salt and Dust is the best example because the video that you made for it, I like watched it on mushrooms and was crying before you opened the piece.
Same.
But like it's just
that's the exact experience I was hoping people would have with
like,
that film.
I don't know, maybe 2 minutes and 30 seconds, and it just sells you on the work in a way that like the photo can't do by itself. And
Yeah,
I love that part about like your work.
Thank you. Yeah, I feel like it's important, you know, and I feel like part of it is due to saturation. I just think there's a lot of, I mean, I've said this before, I think there's just a lot of pretty work out there, and you have to find a way to make yourself, you know, different. And I think the best advice I think I ever got in the industry, that I actually got this advice right before I made that book. It was from a very successful photographer who I looked up to a lot at the time, and has now actually become a friend of mine. But he said, quit trying to do everything. Quit trying to be everything. Like, do one thing and be the best person who's ever done it, you know? And like he brought up a few examples of like National Geographic photographers or just historical photographers or documentary photographers who like, they don't shoot, you know, the mountains and the skies and the seas and you know, everything. They have one particular style or one goal in mind, and they adapt that to everything they do, and they are the best at it in the world. And you know, I'm not the best in the world, but I have that focus now, and I went into pretty much everything since then with that same focus, including Web3. You know, with the goal was just to stand out in some meaningful way, not to be the loudest, but to be the best at something to where people noticed, you know?
So I feel like it's a good point in time to ask you, like, how did you get into Web3? Like, what was that thing or that person that kind of propelled you into the space?
So I have a friend who's actually also a photographer, super talented portrait photographer, and he also is like a full stack developer for Bitcoin, and he's always been into crypto, and he's so he kind of like red pilled me on NFTs like really early. He got into it like in the punk trading era, and I got into NFTs maybe like December 2020. When he was like really pushing hard. He was like, no, it's real, I promise. He's like, it's not just a thing you can like make some extra money on. He's like, this is like digital like fiscal autonomy that you can have through art that already means everything to you, you know? Like, I don't know, it was just he was really adamant about it. And so I came in maybe December 2020. I just kind of watched the space for quite a few months, just thinking about how to be intentional about it. I do things kind of slow. Like I waited 2 years before I made that book, but I also I waited quite a few months before actually like minting anything. I just didn't want to put another JPEG on the chain for people to find. I really wanted to do it with like intention and make sure it was memorable, you know?
And we should probably talk about your Genesis NFT
Yeah.
or NFTs then, because like I think the way you did it was pretty intentional and thoughtful.
Thank you. I really wanted to lead with my best. I think a popular sentiment at the time that I was like trying to figure out how to enter the space, how to mint my work, like which pieces that I meant. A popular sentiment was to like save your best work. It was to save your best work until you could like gain some traction, build a pool of collectors, and then potentially once your like prices started to be higher or like in the range that you wanted them, ideally you would start to sell, you know, your best pieces, but hold on to them until then. And I just like completely rejected that idea. I think that, you know, if I had been doing it for 10 years and I made the best art of my entire career in the first 10 years, that doesn't bode well for the next 10 years. Like, you have to keep improving, and you have to be confident that you're going to be able to make better work in the future. So I just fled with my best. I took essentially my favorite images I had ever taken in the entire course of my career, and I narrowed it down to 3 shots, and I called it Hearth. And it was this like collective, you know, 3-piece sort of unit of images from completely different biomes. One was from the desert, one was from like the deep Canadian Rockies, and the other one was from Alaska. So it was like just 3 different parts of the world, 3 different, you know, environments, and like all 3. I think that shots that are like really meaningful have this kind of X factor. There's like 3 major things that I look for in a shot, and it's like one is like you have to put yourself there. That's the most important thing. You have to put yourself in the place and just be prepared for an event to happen. Like, be prepared for the sun or the you know, wildlife or the light or the storm. Whatever happens, like, you just have to be there, be present. The next is having the mechanical skill to actually capture it if or when it does happen. So you need to have those 2 things. The third thing is the thing that you can't predict. It's whatever pops up that you didn't plan on being there that really makes the shot sort of unrecreatable in a way. I don't want my work to be able to be replicated. I want these shots to be like, you know, kind of one of a kind in a way. And so I took 3 of those shots that I believed hit all those marks, and I made like a 10-minute video where I printed out big prints and I framed them of each shot, and I told the story behind them. Each of these shots has like a pretty fascinating story behind how it came about and how I caught it. And I figured that like half the part of falling in love with these art pieces isn't just like the pretty colors and the scene, but actually knowing what went into it physically, and you know, the time and the luck required to get these shots might be much more than people would think just by looking at them. So I just wanted to really make sure people like understood kind of what goes into adventure photography, since it was still very, very new in the space. There really like wasn't a lot of people doing it. So I just wanted to sort of solidify the, I guess, the uniqueness in people's heads. So it was like a 10-minute YouTube video. I made a trailer, like a cinematic trailer for the Drop of Hearth, and then I wrote poetry for each one. So it was just like this big collective project that I spent months on, probably from like January to like June 2021, just working on this one release. Or I think the end of May, I actually like released it. So
That's awesome, man. I remember watching the videos, and that's why I was bidding.
yeah. Yeah, that's also how I met you. So.
Yeah, no, that feels like it was forever ago, even though it was only, not even 2 years ago.
Yeah.
One of the things I remember early on was just how open and honest and genuine you were. That was one of the things that was like,
thank you.
You were always just like trying to connect with people, not ever in like a insincere way. You were always genuine and like authentic. I think that was something that came across with how you showed and shared your work too. It was like, oh, this is like a outpouring from your soul. It's not like you're trying to market this. You're like, no, like this is like, I had to create this. This is why, and this is the opportunity I had. So it's one of those things where like as a collector, I was just really drawn to this, you know, super authentic person who's putting themselves in positions I would never be in. Like, I'm not gonna go up on a side of a glacier, or I'm not gonna go up probably most mountains. So not the snowy ones.
Some of them though,
but
for sure,
I can vicariously get that experience through the art I collect, and then share it with other people. And then I like that I can like share the story of it. Just something that like I've never really done until collecting NFTs. Well, art, it's just art. Like, I don't even want to say NFTs. It's like collecting art. Never really had stories of like the IKEA art on my wall. Like, oh, I was out in the Slenderman forest and I got this black and white shot, and if you look closely, I penciled in a Slenderman. Like, there's none of that. Like, it's all just like kind of soulless.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely noticed that with Jay. Like, I did like some photography in high school, and I knew that I could get away with like adding depth to it by making up a story. You know, very insincere. Like, I was trying to capture this theme, and I would write really well, and the teacher would be like, "Wow, like that's amazing. Here's an A." But it like made me realize, like, all right, like sometimes I think there's things being embellished.
Yeah.
You know, people are doing a little like, how do I make sense of this?
Yeah.
Like, what would be a good story?
I feel like honesty, man. Like, honesty.
That's what I got from you. You know,
Thank you.
It was like I knew that everything you were saying was exactly why you did that and what you got from that experience. And there was no like extra, you know, kind of like padding put on there. It was just like a real transmission and sharing of like, this is why I had to go here, or this is how I got here, and like, this is what this piece means to me. And like, yeah, and the feeling like each piece was really, I felt like I was on an adventure looking at your work. Like,
that's like
it was
the best thing I could
like
ever hear.
much more like right away. It was much more than just like, holy shit, this looks fucking sick, you know, like, which like your work does, but it made me wonder and it made me think like, wow, there is a deep feeling here. And like, yeah, I also had little mushrooms when I watched when I watched that same video you did, and was just like in my living room sitting next, I watched it by myself and I started crying, and I like ran and got my girlfriend and was like, you have to watch this. This is my friend Jay. Like, this is amazing. And we both just sat there and we're like, oh my God, like this is wild. But yeah, I feel like you've really led with honesty. It's something that like, yeah, really like, I don't know, really resonated with me. Really appreciate that about you.
Thank
and
you.
I feel it comes across in your work. Yeah.
I feel like honesty in how the shots came about is really important, and it's important on both ends. It's important if you did put in an incredible amount of work, danger, athletic achievement, like whatever, or if you didn't. It's important both ways. It's important for people to know that there are some shots out there that like simply won't exist again.
Yeah.
It was too crazy, it was too perfect, it was too, unique of a situation. I have some shots where I planned routes for weeks before even like going see the mountain, and you hike it multiple times halfway to like plan your things, you know what I mean? Like really just an enormous amount of effort. You have small weather windows, and you just like you put an insane amount of trust into those climbs. And then other shots I took out of the window of a moving car, and those are some of my favorite pictures too. But I feel like being honest between the two, it's really how you allow people to connect with your work, because it's like if you want it to be relatable and you're taking images of things that people haven't ever fucking seen, then like the relatability relies on honesty, not on the place, right? Because like I can't have somebody relate to a mountain or a lake that they've never seen before, but they can relate to the feeling, they can relate to the story, they can relate to the idea of a challenge that you need to overcome. So if you're telling that story, the place becomes irrelevant. The place is just a sort of a means, a canvas for me to tell a story through, you know what I mean? But the emotion that people connect with and actually relate to is much, much deeper than just the landscape that I've put myself in. But either that or you take it out the window of a car. Like either way, just be upfront about what went into the shot, and people will connect with it much more,
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's pretty cool that you mention like one big aspect of your work is the luck component. Like you show up and, the conditions are a certain way. Maybe there's a sea lion playing with a friend. Maybe that, you see a horse galloping through a field. Like, I think it's really cool to just, to realize like a big component of this is that luck aspect. And, I think that's what ultimately makes for like a very genuine and relatable photo. And like Deez was saying, like, coming across as a genuine artist and like not like super marketing your work. But like for me, when I saw that photo lull, like it stopped me in my track, because it was like this super stunning photo, and like I can see how there would be that element of luck for capturing, that moment that the sea lion just comes right out of the water. And like, yeah,
definitely. I mean, even that shot in particular, I revisited that place for like 2 weeks in a row, trying to see those eels hang out in the water. And that truly was like, you don't know when they're gonna be there, when they're gonna pop up, where they're gonna be. Like, so it's just a matter of like putting yourself there, making sure that you are in a position to, if or when something happens, you are prepared to capture it.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm curious, you spoke a little bit about your commercial work, and you're working with a lot of very outdoorsy companies, and I feel like companies that are pioneering like climate preservation and things of that nature. And I'm curious, like, has there been feedback, or like kind of what's the outlook of those companies when they look into the Web3 space, or NFTs in particular?
Definitely varied. Some won't even touch it. Some, I think, just even if they within their own sort of board or talkings, I think even if they know that I think we're kind of past the environmental concerns of NFTs and stuff like that. I think there are some companies that know that and are aware of that and may try to get into in the future, but they just they don't want the backlash, and they don't want the fight from the Web 2 world, know?
I mean, yeah, I feel like that makes sense, and it's kind of unfortunate because there's been this narrative being like crafted kind of throughout time, and it is unfortunate that they just don't want the backlash. But I think seeing people like Jimmy Chin starting to enter the space, them getting on Super Rare and minting a Genesis piece, like I feel like over time, those like preconceived biases about the space will kind of like be overcome, at least one would hope.
Yeah, and art in general. I mean, like just a few days ago, my good friend Kath had her shot, which is a composite, a pretty heavy composite, shown at National Geographic Gallery. That's unheard of. Like when I shot for National Geographic, they demanded that I give them my entire card of raw files, not being touched, not being edited, not being doctored in any way, and they would choose to release whichever one they thought was most appropriate for the story. That's how they work as a company. And just a few days ago, for I think the first time ever, they showed a composite photograph in one of their own galleries in an NFT gallery. I mean, that's like massive steps for kind of integration or adoption. Is a leader in things like conservation, like Nat Geo, acknowledging that there's more to art than just the world as it is, and there's more to nature than just how most people see it or most people perceive it. It is more about the feeling of it. And I think that having companies like that acknowledge us or acknowledge our efforts in the Web3 world, that's huge, especially with artists like Jimmy Chin, Paul Nicklin, people like that who are kind of getting into NFTs. It has to push that needle at some point, I would hope.
Yeah.
I think one thing I'd love to know, because I honestly only really learned about it through following and listening to photographers that were in the Web3 world. When you talk about composite work and you talk about the way in which you either alter or don't alter your work, what does all of that really mean? Because I assume there's probably a few people that might see this or listen that are like, wait, what the fuck is what's composite photography? What do you do? Yeah.
Sure. So composite photography in general is when you sort of take liberties with the landscape and you add foregrounds that weren't there, or mountains that weren't there, or maybe a sky or stars or something that didn't exist in the shot as you took it, and you kind of put it in either from a previous shot that you have or something else that you make digitally. Usually a composite is just a heavily photoshopped piece where you sort of just present truly how the place looked or could have looked in a dream, in a feeling, in a on a mushroom trip, whatever it is that you feel like that nature could be, you make it happen. You make it real. And I have a lot of admiration for composite photography. It feels a lot more like a painting, almost like a canvas, where you don't have it's not done for you. You're just kind of crafting this world, but from the real world. These are shots you've taken of places you've been. They're just all compiled together in a way that feels more real or beautiful to you. And I think that's really, really cool. I personally don't composite any of my shots. I won't. I kind of refuse to. It's not even because and obviously I enjoy composite photography. I don't have anything against it. I just feel like talking about that luck factor, I feel like composite photography removes that aspect, right? If there was an event happening that I wished would have happened but didn't, I could just add it in later, and that for me takes me personally out of the emotion. I really want to show the beauty of places like in the rare moments that they just amaze me and just blow me completely away. And so I wait until those moments happen. So all my shots are single shots. I won't add anything. If there's a bird, an animal, a tree, a light, a sunset, whatever, it happened. I like to mess with my colors. I like colors pretty heavily. I like to make things look sort of whimsical, and I like the palette of Renaissance paintings. So I'll edit my colors pretty heavily, but I won't ever add anything into a shot or really even take anything out of a shot. Maybe if there's a piece of granola bar on the ground that I forgot about or something, I might remove that, but I won't add anything in, and I won't chop up the foreground or background or anything like that. So
yeah, no, thanks for adding that. I mean, it really does speak to the uniqueness of that one journey that you've set out on. It
also makes me come out with a lot less work, because I mean, if I could just take parts of the places I've been and put them together, which I can, I'm not trying to limit myself. Maybe I'll get into composite photography one day, but for me right now, I really think there's a power to be had in waiting for those moments to happen to you. It kind of feels like a gift. It feels like you're being presented with this opportunity to witness something so grand and rare and special that like it's even more humbling to be able to share and be able to turn into art that makes people feel things, you know, because I didn't create it. It truly happened to me, which I like a lot, you know.
So with mountaineering, it sounds like there's skill that you build up over time. There's obviously a lot of preparation that go into these adventures. Have you ever found yourself in a moment where you're like, oh shit, I'm a little over my head here. Like maybe I jumped into this a little bit too quickly.
Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes. Actually, one of my favorite art pieces is called Defeat. You actually own Defeat. It's one of my favorite pieces I've ever made, and it came from a climb like that. We were attempting to summit one of the highest mountains in the Canadian Rockies, and we were going up the back side of it, which is the icy side, not the snowy side, so you can't just snowshoe up it. You have to crampon ice axe your way up, and it was fun, and we had checked all the weather things. It was a 14-hour day that we spent in the mountains, and just a weird storm. The weather in the mountains can be very volatile, very unpredictable, and we could kind of see it coming in on the radars before we started the climb, and we were just like, this is our last shot pretty much of the season to climb this mountain. We had just had a big freeze, and so the condition of the ice was really good, and we just decided to end it, and the storm hit us like almost head on, so it just became this like swirling Armageddon in the sky while we were trying to get back down the mountain, and it became like one of my favorite memories and shots, just because of like I mean, I talked about this a bit, but it really solidified the beauty of the attempt, the beauty of the journey. Like the soul of the adventure lies in just getting out there, not necessarily the peak. I think it changes how you think about endeavors of really any kind, where it becomes less and less about the end goal becoming exactly what you thought or hoped or planned for it to be, and more of just like being a servant of the opportunities that you've been given. So at that time, like the only thing I could do was make art from a chaotic storm and a bad situation, and we were dealing with unturbed health, and it warmed up too fast, and my ice screws weren't ticking, and it wasn't a fun situation, but I still felt like there was a story to be told, and the story was of being fucking wrecked by this mountain. And so I tried to tell that story the best I could in this image called Defeat. So sometimes, I don't get any shots like with the mountain, that I climbed when I was with you, but sometimes it can be the coolest ones, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah, I love to hear that. And also soul of the adventure is beautiful.
Yeah. I also I think aggressive self-curation is also a really good sort of self-preservation tool for artists that more artists should take advantage of. I travel almost full time in this little fire truck, and we hike a lot, we ski a lot, and I take maybe 200,000 to 300,000 photos a year from these places. And even way before getting into Web3, when I was still doing full-time commercial work, I would maybe release like 5 to 10 images per year of that several 100,000 I took. And it's not that I don't think there are shots on there that aren't like pretty and like wouldn't make people say like, wow, that's really pretty, but I just want so much more than that. It has to be special, and so that kind of curation, coupled with the fact that I don't composite, makes my work pretty infrequent to actually release, and I'm pretty proud of that.
And with that in mind, how do you balance, because I do think you do a good job of balancing outputting enough variety for a variety of collectors? Like you have one-on-ones, you have the Elysian Fields edition, you also have crowns. Like I think you've done a pretty good job of having a different piece at different price points for collectors. But how do you do that while still aggressively self-curating?
I think the main thing I do is I don't attach like value to a floor, to like a rising price point. I think every piece that you take that's really, really good, worth minting, worth sharing, should be kind of on its own scale of price or value. If you're constantly chasing like all-time highs and stuff like that, you're going to be very frustrated. And it's also not fair. It's not fair to yourself artistically to believe that every shot should be like financially valued the same, because you're just like, that's not real. I think art is just a reflection of the human experience. And since when has life ever been like a linear upward progression? You know, it's a very up and down thing, and art is just a reflection of that. So you have to be willing to acknowledge that you may make a lot of Mona Lisas, you know, in your life, and you may make some that end up in the basement of some old guy who nobody knows his name, and that's okay. But you know, as long as that art that you're creating is like the best that you can make at the time of life that you're in, like that's what's most important. Not the price, the value, the scarcity. For me, they kind of go hand in hand. I just I find shots that I believe are truly unrecreatable, and I price accordingly. At the same time, I don't want to feel like my work is so inaccessible when the goal of my, you know, making art from the mountains originally was to make these places accessible. So I want people to be able to own my art that I feel like that they deserve to see and feel like they're a part of, but at a price point that's like realistic. So maybe a little bit of playing the game of Web3 between editions, one-of-ones, whatever, but it's mostly just like trying to make sure that I have a big variety of both emotion and like wild places that people can feel like they're a part of, and at many different price points.
What's the place at the top of your list that you haven't been to but you'd like to go?
Probably Greenland.
Why?
It's almost because there's nothing there. There's like very few little villages there. The best way to get there is by boat, by sailing ship between Iceland, which is one of my favorite spots, and Greenland. You can sail across this channel, and I really want to climb glaciers that don't have any names, and that people don't map, and that people don't have like sensors and scientists on. I want to go see like ice walls that have been untouched by axes and stuff. There's just like a weird draw to that kind of place for me, and I also just love cold places, and it's Greenland. So it's like I think that would be amazing.
A bad name for a place that I'm assuming isn't super green.
There is no green on the entire country.
It's just called Greenland.
It's just called Greenland. I think it was like a prank. They just pranked the whole world by calling it Greenland.
Well, Iceland was already taken, probably.
Yeah.
They probably should be called Iceland.
Iceland's pretty green, so I don't know what they were doing, really.
Maybe
Iceland's green, Greenland's ice. It's not fair.
Maybe probably some kind of trade, where it was like, hey, we'll take Iceland, you have Greenland. It's definitely, we'll give
it's
you
bigger, it's greener, it's better.
Yeah, it's better. It's just simply better.
Just take our word for it. Yeah.
Yeah. I would say Greenland. I would love to do that. I think it really speaks to kind of all aspects of my photography, the rarity, the hard to reachness of it, the difficulty, the inaccessibility of Greenland. It's hard to get there. Once you get there, it's hard to travel around. I feel like if I was given that opportunity to go shoot there, I could really kind of harness my goal of emotional landscape photography from that kind of a isolated place.
Just thinking off of like isolated, you mentioned one person helped you get into this space. How many did you know many photographers that were also into Web3 beforehand? Because I feel like the photography community is like quite strong and has been since I don't know, got involved with it about a year and a half ago. But yeah, I'm curious, like, did you have a bunch of your kind of contemporaries or colleagues or friends that were joining around the same time?
Honestly, no. I think most of the community that of photographers in Web3 came from Instagram. I think a lot of them knew each other and they kind of went in the same circles. I never really pursued Instagram. Like at any point in my career, I went really hard into the commercial end of things, which has almost nothing in common with Instagram. It's kind of its own set of like jobs, clients, whatever, that you get from Instagram versus what you get from like the more traditional commercial photographer world. So I never really went super hard into Instagram. I don't think I ever really had a community over there anyway. I just never put time into it, even though I was on it for years. And so like when I went into Web3, I didn't know anyone. There was like a few people I had seen or kind of knew of, maybe I had done a job with at some point, who ended up in Web3 maybe a few months or like half a year after I did. But at the time that I joined, I didn't know anybody except for that one friend of mine who isn't in it anymore, and then Kath. I was a big fan of Kath's work, and so I knew her coming in. Other than that, it was pretty much just like this. It was just me and like a bunch of glitch art and digital art that I was trying to kind of like find my place in, which is also another thing that I actually love about getting into it. The main art form that I consumed beforehand was all photography. It was like if I was ever going to look at art or feel something, it was going to always be from a photograph, because that's what I identified with most. And like day one getting into NFTs, I was like, damn, these people are so good. Like digital art is sick, you know what I mean? So I've now become like being, potentially more into consuming digital art than even photography. It's like a nice gap that I've found and now filled since getting into it, which is cool.
Do you ever create any digital art aside from photography?
Maybe.
Give any anonymous wallets
Maybe.
you can go find for?
I got like an Anon-Tez wallet.
Yeah.
It's just minting digital art at all times.
Bangers.
Your alt's just X copy.
It's just X copy. No,
not X copy.
Nah,
I dabble in some digital art here and there, but nothing I'm proud enough to share. Maybe one day that'll be part of the arc of the journey, but currently it's just it's kind of all into photography and filmmaking.
I tried to do a little digital art, but I'm just not creatively minded. I don't have it in me.
I disagree. I think it's just time. I feel like you have an extremely creative mind. I feel like the time to learn the tools.
My coordination between my fingers and my mind is very lackluster.
Gone.
There's a lot of things in my mind that I want to do, and I can't do it with my fingers. But I will say, like, DALL-E is one of the few things where I can just kind of word vomit out something and create without needing the precision of my fingers, which is nice.
I feel like I haven't really found much success with DALL-E and Midjourney and Stable Diffusion, but the closest thing I've had, and we just missed, Connor's now left, but when we've done some kind of like branding thing or some like internal art, I feel like that's been the closest where I've been like, all right, the vibe, like I'm looking for kind of this and maybe some green and blues, but yeah, I got to try it out because I find a similar thing. Like I like photography, but I don't know, maybe I'll get back into it. I used to like developing a lot of stuff, but I guess like looking at the broader landscape of NFTs and art and the past year and a bit, what was because you joined like right peak bull market. What was that experience like for you, man? It's like a wild time to be getting in. Yeah, would love to know, like, how was that balancing your artistic vision as well as just like being a part of this crazy chaotic space?
Very, very overwhelming and equally as exciting, I would say. I saw the potential for NFTs to be like just a level of autonomy that I had just never seen in my time in the commercial field, because it doesn't really matter at what level you work in the commercial field. You're still working for somebody. Your goal, your purpose is to make them money at the end of the day. If it's incredible art and it doesn't make them money, you did a bad job. And that's like always in the back of your head, you know what I mean? And I would come back from shoots or expeditions or assignments or whatever with shots that I was really, really proud of, but if it didn't fit the theme or the vibe or like the, you know, aesthetic of a company, it was like a worthless shot. And it was always hard to get over that for me over the years. And NFTs, like, that was the first thing I think I really identified that could be different, really different from the trad art or like commercial world, was just the fact that like you can take the pieces that are most meaningful, most powerful to you, where you're not trying to make anybody else money. You're not trying to fit an aesthetic or shoot in a way that sort of like pleases the board members. You're trying to like make the best art you can, throw it out into the void, and like tug the heartstrings of like one particular person who just sees it and falls in love with it immediately. And that to me is just powerful. It's a powerful ability to have that I hadn't ever experienced. I was kind of trying to get into the art world, the trad art world, after being a little bit burnt out on the commercial end of things. And it was kind of the end of it was like the end of the major kind of shutdowns of the pandemic, like late 2020, and lost a lot of commercial work, lost a lot of big jobs, lost a lot of opportunities that I felt like I had been working towards for like years and years. And I just felt like probably the lowest I ever had in my career right before getting into it. So it was this extremely overwhelming feeling of like, you know, not being prepared, not even having the time to learn as much about this new market as I would have liked to, but also just being so excited about the potential to make art for the sake of like the power that it has, not to make art for the sake of like selling something somewhere for someone. I think that's probably the biggest like overwhelming theme of my like first kind of entry into NFTs, was just like the opportunities seemed just endless.
What would you say is the most important thing you learned from the bull run in the last year, as not only an artist but just as like a participant in the space in person?
Take profits. Take profits. That's been the major, like, I think, new thing that I've learned since getting into the space, just because I mean I'm new-ish to crypto, newish to trading, all that kind of thing. And so it's just like the fact that now my business sort of resides on the blockchain, you have to be aware of like those kind of rules, like take profits, which I haven't really had to worry about before, but that's a big one to like any artist that's getting into this. But more personally than taking profits, but by the way, take profits. More importantly is be intentional. Don't just start, you know, minting your Instagram feed or digging through hard drives trying to come up with something that you think might work, or pandering to a specific collector, like seeing there's a big whale who buys a lot of dark pieces, and so you just make a dark piece because you think you might like. It's not authentic. It's not real. It's not you. You know, have an intention. Don't come in the space and just, I guess, you know, have a plan. That's all. You know what I mean? Have a plan and know that you are here for the art, and don't sway from that. Don't try to pander. Don't try to pretend. Don't make up stories. Just come in and lead with art every single time, and you'll do fine, you know.
Yeah, I think what you were saying about being intentional is really interesting, especially considering you had mentioned taking several thousand photos throughout a year, maybe
hundreds of thousands,
and maybe minting 5.
Yeah.
How do you go about that self-curation process? Like, how much time are you spending between going on these mountaineering trips versus going through the photos you've taken to eventually, you know, select the handful that you end up minting or publishing throughout the year?
So I actually have a really weird process for picking images. I take photos and I don't look at them for like months, sometimes weeks, but usually months. And the reason for that is, again, like I want the main thing that you pull from an image to not be the mountain, the river, the whatever. I want it to be the feeling. I want it to be the emotion. I want you to feel power. I want you to feel alone. I want you to feel not alone. I want you to feel something that I feel while standing in that place, but I want the place to be the last thing on your mind. I want the feeling to be the main thing. And I don't get that the day after I take a shot. The day after I take a shot, I'm still thinking of exactly how it looked, and all the colors are very vivid in my head. And I won't edit in a way that I enjoy until like months later. I have this sort of like whimsical, almost dreamlike way where I like to edit, and the colors are very like painting-esque. And I don't think about my shots that way until the main thing in my head is the memory and the nostalgia, not the actual moment. That makes sense. So if I take a picture and it's this glorious sunset and I go and edit it, it will be far too vivid, far too real for me to actually like it, because I'll still have that memory of being there just yesterday in my head. That's at the forefront, and I'll make it too crisp. You know what I mean? And I'm not trying, again, to just be like a recorder for the world. I'm trying to make you whimsical. I'm trying to make you think. I'm trying to make you dream. I'm trying to make you like wonder about this place. And so I get that from having the memory of actually being there be a little bit hazy, a little bit old, a little bit like, I just remember the way it felt to stand there next to Cassidy at the top of the mountain, or to hear the sound of the river, or to, you know what I mean? So months after I take a shot, I'll actually start to go through them. And usually when I curate those shots out, I edit them right away, but I don't start until like months after.
That's really interesting. So almost, you need to take a step back and like somewhat like have that experience be a little hazy to put yourself in like the mindset of a viewer, to like make it so, it's this like nostalgic moment that you went through, and that it'll come across that way to the viewer. That's really interesting.
Yeah, I think that it just, I think it leads you to make more emotional art. That's all. It's more about, it's like, I don't know, it's hard to actually put it into words, but it's more about remembering feelings than places. And even though the place is magnificent, the time spent between being there and making and choosing your colors or your palette or whatever, it changes drastically over that period of time. And I really enjoy that.
Yeah, it's interesting, because I always wonder, when artists create a piece like for sale, like they create it, if they're a photographer, they take that shot, they edit it, they mint it, they sell it, all within like a week. Like I've always wondered, like, does that feel weird? Like it's, you've kind of like given away this thing before you had a chance to feel like it was really like yours. Like, and yeah, it's really interesting to hear your approach to this. I'm not sure if you've told me that before. I don't think you have.
I don't really talk about it a lot. I don't think people ask, so I don't really offer that piece of information. I'm happy you asked.
Yeah, I'm happy too, because like those pieces, like they are really like woven with this feeling, like there's not a lot of processing, but there's like a clear sense of like something happening. And a sense that a lot happened to get there.
Right.
And so now knowing that like that vibe is curated from memory, which is kind of like the only thing we ever really have, it's interesting to hear that, because it's like you're clearly putting your feelings and what you remember about that experience into the final product, and experiencing that like long-term ownership and bringing it back like, oh, I remember you, old friend. I took you this photo months ago. And yeah, that's really interesting.
I also feel like I'm a very nostalgic person, so I thrive on memories, and that's like one of my favorite things is just to reminisce about things that that have happened. And I feel like if something just happened, you're still kind of like hyped up on it. You still kind of have this like elation from the moment that I think can actually negatively skew the way that you look at it. You're almost too high, you know what I mean, on the feeling. And I think like I look at art, especially curation, way more objectively months later, because maybe something stood out to me at the time, but if it doesn't still stand out to me, 4 months later, then was it really that special? Was it really that important? You know what I mean? So if I take a shot and it's wonderful and I edit it the next day and I release it, in a few months, if I don't even remember what that shot or taking that shot felt like, I'm not going to be happy. I'm not going to be proud of having that photo out there in the world if I can't still connect to it. If I can't still connect to it, how do I expect anybody else to connect to it? So if I wait a while and that memory sticks, I can be much more confident that it'll stick with other people for like a long period of time as well,
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And I'm curious, as you think about these experiences that you've gone through, is there something that you've been trying to capture that like hasn't quite lined up? Like maybe you've went on an excursion for a specific shot multiple times, but things just haven't aligned, so you haven't been able to get that. Is there something that like you're still, not necessarily that you're trying to do, but like waiting for, or like something that you're trying to capture, have been trying? And if the answer is no, that's totally fine.
Yeah, I think there is. I think there is. It's the feeling of freedom that I don't really know how to capture in the world. I mentioned earlier, like I suffer with a lot of mental illness, a lot of depression, and a lot of my art reflects that. It's sort of, like I said, either like the hope between the darkness or just this oppressive isolation. I sort of bounce between the two, and my art often looks like one of those two things. And something that I've been trying to capture for years and actually feel like I did a good job is a feeling of freedom, a feeling of like weightlessness. All of my photos, no matter how much fun I was having at the time that I took them, when I edit them, there always tend to be one of those two feelings, which I don't mind. I think those feelings are very authentic, and that's the number one thing. I think I'm just looking forward to a day where up here I feel free, and so then I can make art that shows that, So it's not as much an art piece that I'm like hoping to make, you know what I mean? It's more of a feeling I'm hoping to feel. I'm hoping to feel free from those things in my head one day, and maybe I can make art that reflects that then. So I guess just hoping to feel better. It's not really, you know what I mean? It's art, but it's also life.
That's such a beautiful response. I was not expecting that at all. I really loved hearing that.
Thanks.
I know we are coming up on, I think, the 90 minutes here. We have one question that Funghi asked last pod that we're going to ask every episode now. Funghi, do you want to ask it?
Yeah, for sure. So the question is, and you can interpret it in whatever way comes natural. If you could say anything at all, communicate anything to your younger self, could be childhood, could be whatever age kind of pops up in your mind when I say the phrase, what would that be? Would love to hear. Anything you'd love little Jay to know.
Any version of little Jay.
Yeah, I honestly think it's just like, it gets brighter. It gets brighter. It gets better. Like, I feel like I've had a lifetime to very slowly learn that every time I had an opportunity to make a drastic decision to kind of end the pain or end the turmoil up here, there was always a corner I turned shortly after where it became worth it again to still be here, to still make art, to still, have something to say to the world. And I think if I had ever like fully succumb to those feelings, I feel like there would be, a hole that I could have filled somewhere in the world, somewhere in someone's heart, somewhere in the art that I could have created. So I'm like happy to be here, but if I could go back, it would have been easier just to know that it does get a little brighter, I would say that's my answer.
I love you, man. I'm so grateful
Love you
that
too,
you're
Fun.
here. We're
Dude, we love
also
you so
grateful
much.
to
I
know
love you, Dee. I love you, Bernardo. Yeah, man. It's nice. Thanks for having me on. This was super fun.
No, I love this vibe. This is like it's every little like round table type question thing is like different. But with me, Funghi, and Bernardo, I like it. It's like three kind of collectors sit down and artist, and then we all kind of like bounce off each other's thoughts. And I think that's really cool.
Also, all of you have such like insightful questions. I'm not being asked like, I don't know. I feel like sometimes you get asked questions and you feel like you're just like parroting the same response that you gave every other time that you were asked that question. But I feel like you guys really make me think, and that's really important. So thank you all for like putting in so much effort into the pod,
No, I mean, our whole thing is we've had a lot of the same conversations ourselves, both as collectors, and like I'm sure we've all had the same conversation in Twitter Spaces.
That's 1,000 hours
times.
of
But then
Spaces.
you've also had the same conversation
Right.
on different Twitter Spaces or podcasts another 15, 20 times. And
Probably
it's
your Twitter
hundreds.
Spaces is where I was when I had those conversations.
Well, it's good too because it gives us the background to go a little deeper and
Yeah.
not need to like ask all those. But I still want to ask enough to like make it so someone listening for the first time
Yeah.
can kind of have a place to start off from, rather than me just like assuming everybody knows XYZ. So it is good to have a balance. I think we crushed it. So like, thank you.
Nailed it. Thank you guys.
And yeah, until next time.
Until next time.
Miami's been such a vibe.
It really has been.
This has been the best event yet.
Yeah. This
Hard
has been
agree.
amazing.
Hard agree.
Yeah.